Well, the Pentagon has done its best to assure Texans that the Jade Helm military operations in their state are nothing more than a training exercise. It turns out not only are those in the Lone Star State not convinced, neither are a lot of people nationwide. A poll by Public Policy Polling released found that 32% of the GOP primary voters nationwide believe that the military operations are an effort by the federal government to take over Texas. 40% dismissed that notion, 28% weren't sure. The poll results are just the latest in a long, strange saga of Jade Helm 15. The controversy started when the government announced it would conduct a multi-state special forces training operation this summer. Planning documents for the operation that were leaked online identified Texas and several other states as hostile territory. Hence, conspiracy theorists took to social media with the claim that the operation was the first step towards martial law in that state. Then Texas Governor Greg Abbott announced that the Texas State Guard would monitor the U.S. military's movements in his state. Now, the White House has repeatedly denied the operation as anything other than a training exercise. Operation Jade Helm poses no threat to any American civil liberties, according to an Army colonel and a Pentagon spokesperson. Operation Jade Helm, he goes on to say, is being conducted by Americans, by specifically American Special Forces personnel. But still, what does this all mean? They had a training exercise during 9/11. They had a training exercise during the Boston Marathon. In England, when that train was blown up, they had a training exercise going on there. Coincidental. I don't believe in coincidences. What's going on with Jade Helm 15? In a moment, Stephen Quayle joins us, and we'll talk about it right here on Coast to Coast AM. Tonight I want to talk with Stephen about Jade Helm. And Jade Helm is strange. Stephen, I want to bring you in here. First of all, how'd they get this name?
But Jade Helm is an interesting choice of terminology because, again, even from their insignia and their emblem, there's all sorts of internet, not only rumors, but people deciphering it. But Jade Helm is fascinating because here's one of the definitions for Jade Helm: the Joint Assistant for Development and Execution along with Homeland Eradication of Local Militants. It doesn't get any clearer. Now, here's the interesting thing. I heard your opening statement and just reading about it. This is unparalleled in the history of the military. It is basically, it's unprecedented. The time is absolutely never been that great for a 2 to 3 month that may be extended, and talks about Jade Helm going on. So there's something unusual here, and I think here's the key point, and we'll hit the bottom line and then work backwards with your permission.
Sure.
When you're talking about a government that now has labeled different groups of what would mostly, American citizens, and everybody from conspiracy theorists, tax protesters, militias, Second Amendment supporters. I'm reading the list off the government's own website: sovereign citizens, U.S. veterans, U.S. patriots, constitutionalists, Christians and survivalists. Anybody who fits into the Second Amendment category has been categorized as a terrorist. Now, it is no secret that the desire to disarm the United States has been long going ever since 7277, the United Nations Freedom from War document. So when you're dealing with an unprecedented military training exercise that is taking place largely at night, special operations, you've got to question the fact that people would automatically begin to worry, especially when Texas and Utah are considered hostile states. Now, what's really important, George, and this is the bottom line, and then again, we'll take it from here. The governor of Texas, in my opinion, is one of the bravest, and I would say this, one of the most unusual leaders in the country because something doesn't smell right. And when you watch the YouTube videos of Bastrop, Texas, and the military spokesman and the DHS handler basically watching what the military is saying, and the people in Bastrop, Texas were absolutely asking the right questions, and yet when they're met with basically denial or a lack of familiarity with the original Jade Helm document, people say something doesn't sound right. The question everyone has to ask is this: why would special operations be supposedly doing nighttime exercises through 15 states, actually it's now 40 states, between the hours of midnight and 5 in the morning? And Special Operations has a creed, a motto: they own the night.
And it's going to last months, too, Stephen.
It's going to last months. And we've talked about it on your show, the list that the government keeps lists. Well, I think the critical point here is that we went from fighting an external enemy, obviously terrorist, Islamic terrorists. Now the American people have become, if you will, the target. Now, it takes in a bigger scope and compass in that, George, because we've seen the military actually militarize the police. We're seeing the respect that once was offered to law enforcement taken away. We're seeing policemen murdered in cold blood. We're seeing citizens murdered in cold blood. And I maintain that there's an unseen hand basically stirring up the stuff, if you know, because we talked on Coast to Coast pretty much 15 years ago about the coming Civil War. And now it's almost a given. When you see former gangs banding together and talking about the coming war, when you see the most divisive policies in any administration pitting one group of Americans against another, I think it becomes obvious that the focus of Jade Helm is much more, and I'll use the word, these are my words, sinister, and it's much deeper than the superficial denials. You can't deny the YouTube videos of literally hundreds of thousands of pieces of artillery being moved and strategically positioned through the country. It's fascinating. There are no operations. The FBI knows of over 50 terrorist training camps. There has not been one raid on one terrorist training camp. There is not one mention, obviously, even about the incident in Texas from the White House, yet we're seeing I'll call it a pogrom or a purge that's getting ready to take place. And that's why I believe that the state of Texas is obviously the most immediate target just because of their border with Mexico. We don't see the borders closed. We see border guards. I hear from them. They email me frustrated. If they make arrests, they're demoted or fired or worse. The external threats to this country are no longer even addressed, let alone prepared for, and everything is turned on the American citizen.
Stephen, I've got at least 7 states that are going to be involved with this: Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida. They say that California, Colorado, and Nevada were going to, but they're not doing it anymore. I'm not sure. And then it starts around July 15th through September 15th. That's pretty long, isn't it?
Well, it's really long, but if you begin to look at the 10 reasons Jade Helm, and I just did this for the show tonight.
And what does the 15 mean, too? What does that mean?
The 15 means 2015. By the way, that was a targeted date for the beginning of the disarmament of the United States. And, whether people want to believe it, and this is no longer conspiracy, the ability for critical thinking, you and I have discussed it at length over the years on Coast, has diminished greatly. But here's the thing. Texas and Utah listed as hostile, surgical strikes and extractions. Participants will be infiltrating American towns, attempting to blend in. The UN is also being seen across the country in Jade Helm states. What business is the UN associated with special operations across the country? Fort Lauderdale, Florida drills, roundups, and internment. And this all goes to the FEMA camps and all the other guests that you've had on talking about this.
This is weird, Stephen. It's as if they know something we don't. I mean, we can look at it 2 ways. One, September 15th comes and goes, and the exercises end, and everybody goes home, and we go, and you'll be back on with me, and we say, well, nothing really happened, I guess. They trained. But there's something else afoot here. And the fact that they would have to train for this, that's the weird thing to me.
Well, the word roundup should really be the key, if you will, the key to this puzzle. And internment, obviously we've got the history of the Japanese internment camps during World War II, taking place mainly late hours between 11 and 5, and I've actually seen, and I've posted on my website, probably hundreds of stories, but they've even issued statements to the police and sheriff not to respond to 9/11 calls. Well, I've got to tell you, when I see the words internment and extraction, that's exactly what you would expect them to do, and we've seen special operations do this type of, if you will, enforcement of U.S. policy in third world countries. But now you've got to question why they're doing it at the hours they're doing it, for the length of time they're doing it. Many of the military exercises are in violation of posse comitatus, which basically prevented the military from acting as a police force. The military equipment buildup seen across the country is like they're preparing for war. So you just made a statement, I think that's critical. Is this basically being put out as one thing but preparing for something else, perpetual war for perpetual peace? And unconventional warfare is nothing more than basically, I'll tell you what that boils down to, is assassinations at night, extraction, and the targeted elimination of anybody seen as a threat to those who are behind the exercise.
Well, and the fact that the Texas governor would stick his neck in the political noose and be concerned about this, it's unbelievable. Now let's speculate. I know it's not great to do that, but let's speculate for a moment, Stephen, that the governor's correct and that some of the people who are afraid of this are correct. What in God's name do they want to take Texas over for? Is this like the Alamo all over again? I mean, what would the government want to do by taking over Texas? Ridding everybody of guns? I mean, what's the mission?
Yeah, that's part of it, but Texas is the heart. Texas is the heart, in my opinion, of freedom, of the history of America. Obviously, we've got the situation with the longest border with Mexico. Years ago, we were reporting of absolute eyewitness reports of both Russian military and Chinese military. You remember, I think we did a show on that several years ago. But Texas is, if you will, Texas is a heartbeat of, in my opinion, freedom, liberty, and the will to resist tyranny and evil. And it's fascinating to me that, as you've probably seen the map, that not only does Texas fit into the Ozatlan takeover, the rumors in the military and intelligence people that I'm talking to is a treaty's already been signed with Mexico that those states must be subjugated in order to restore and return them to Mexican control.
See, here's my theory, Steve. Tell me what you think. I think it is a training exercise, but it's much more than that. It's a training exercise to see what if, and with concerns of another financial crisis that is looming. I mean, we see these retail stores closing all over the place, Radio Shack all over the place. We saw what happened in Baltimore. We saw what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. And those were just with people who are upset with law enforcement. But let's broaden it a little bit, and let's say everybody's upset. Blacks, whites, absolutely. Everybody's upset. And they figure, how do we control this? How do we put a lid on it? We need to train for this in case this happens. So twofold possibilities. One, it is a training exercise because they know what could happen if all these things fall into place. Two, it's a planned takeover. I don't think that's going to happen in this case. But what do you think of those two possibilities?
Well, I think it's more than a possibility. I think it's a high probability, especially let's take the economic collapse. From the beginning of the administration, they've been talking, and one of the administration spokesmen said to Kyle Bass they intend to crash the U.S. dollar. what's interesting is that you can imagine that even today, you've probably seen them too, George, the stories of cyber attacks getting ready to happen, banks not being prepared, the changing of the guard in the banking world, that if banks lose money, they can now take the depositors' money based on the change of law that when you and I used to put money in a bank, that we were considered secured lenders or secured depositors. Now we're considered unsecured lenders, meaning that if you have 100 people with $1 million each, a $100 million bank, and the bank loses $50 million, the loss is spread through the depositors. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing banks now bad-mouthing cash. They're trying to take control of every ability to operate outside of the surveillance state. So I believe this. I believe that there will be a triggered financial event. I believe that not only is this an exercise, but it's the prepositioning of men and materiel throughout the country in anticipation of that. Because, again, the bottom line is we're at the point now where the U.S. dollar is being completely abrogated, who the allies of the United States are now going with China. China is going to bring out the yuan with some form of commodity, including gold backing. The day they show, we talked about this, the day they show their 30,000 metric tons of gold, by the way, that's 3 times what most people believe that they have, and say, we'll show you ours. Now you show us yours, America. There is no gold in Fort Knox. The bottom line is the biggest brokerage firms in the country, the giant vampire squid, as the Rolling Stone article called 2 of America's biggest banks, actually Goldman, they called him that, Max Tabib, I believe he's quoted with that statement or credited with that statement. Once that day comes, then you're going to see all the world's investment go to the new BRIC currency or the new combination Russian-Chinese. Look, Russia and China are buying gold by the thousand.
And they're buddy-buddy.
Yep, and they're buddies, and we have alienated so many people under the last 6 years of this administration. And when you see Britain, and when you see Australia, New Zealand, and the English-speaking world going with China, and China is brilliant in the financial realm. I tell people, you better not lose track of the fact that China has had multi-thousand-year dynasties and countries come and go in the West in hundreds of years. So I believe that that's one of the major things that's going to cause the riots, George, is the very fact that when people's credit cards won't work, and they're already setting that up too. They're setting it up by way of already filtering into the mainstream press the fact that there's going to be a giant cyber attack on the financial institutions. I just monitor the actual Google searches for that, and they're increasing dramatically. So just people who can't access their checking accounts. Now, this isn't scare tactics. This isn't a conspiracy.
No, this is real. This could happen. Stephen, stay with us. I've got a third theory that I want to run by you when we come back. Third scenario, that it's not a training exercise. It's not a takeover of some certain areas and states, but that they have a definitive terror alert that they don't want to tell us in that region, and that they need to move troops and get them ready when it happens. What do you think of that?
That's a possibility. But again, it's because they fail to identify the intended or the impending provocateurs that makes everyone nervous. It makes everyone nervous, from Chuck Norris. It makes the governor of Texas nervous. And this is the problem, George. When people lie, just like you at the beginning of the Tonight Show, you were talking about why is it that every exercise seems to go active?
I know it. It's weird.
Well, I see. The exercise is usually let's say this, it's the top bread in a sandwich, and I would say this, of planned evil. And while you're looking at the sandwich, you don't see what's in the middle, and what's in the middle isn't what you think it is. So that's a potential, but the problem is they should allay the fears, or, put at ease the people of not only Texas, but Utah and all of the states. And let's face it, these are red states. These are conservative states. You're not seeing Jade Helm taking place on the East Coast, are we? So the point is that we're seeing a definitive plan. I don't know if people remember, but the president and the former governor of Texas, Rick Perry, had a rather heated discussion when Governor Perry, then Governor Perry, was concerned about the illegal immigration, and they even had a video of it, and the president was just laughing. So why this is critical is that the third potential is real. And let's just say this. Let's say there's a fourth potential. Let's say there's going to be an orchestrated invasion, Red Dawn type situation to the southern border of the United States.
A false flag?
Yeah, false flag. And while the false flag is underway, people who are to disappear, I think people have got to understand that in 1972, Larry Graithwall, he basically penetrated the Weather Underground. In those days, 72, they were talking about 30 million people, basically Southerners with guns having to be murdered off, disappeared. Well, if you take the population then versus now, you're talking about 100 million people. And for the record, it's almost antithetical that we're provoking, the United States is provoking Russia. We have no business stirring up the crap in Ukraine. Sorry for the word, but it's true. Even the State Department spokesman was caught on mic making that statement. And now we've got basically a Cold War scenario. You've read the stories, heating up, and people saying we've never seen these type penetrations or provocations even during the Cold War. And as a guy that started out as a newsletter writer in dealing with the Cold War and nuclear war politics, I can tell you that's a true statement. But now what's ironic about this, we have Russian troops in the United States at the request of then FEMA, Department of Homeland Security, and the interesting thing is that I got a letter. I think it's on the internet. I know it's on my website someplace, but George, I've lost track where everything is on my website. But it was basically a request from then director of the DHS to ask the Russians to bring troops to the United States for training and for the disarmament of U.S. citizens. So disarmament is a big deal. I believe even the president's wife made a statement recently in the last 2 months that her husband's going to disarm the population. So people know this, that there is no history of disarmament without slaughter. None. Nada. When we see the fact that if you're watching people be murdered in cold blood, and I believe this, I believe that there used to be a day when you and I would look at a law enforcement individual and know that he was there to protect and serve. But with the militarization, and I made this statement 15 years ago, I said the goal of the provocateurs who want revolution in the United States will be to turn the police against the people and the people against the police. And what we're confronted with is almost insane videos for no reason of somebody getting their head beat in, teeth knocked out, a woman shot in cold blood in Washington, D.C. We all remember that story. And when lethal force, I mean, come on, when you've got a SWAT team and some of these guys are 240 pounds and, they eat nails and lift 300 pounds, they don't really need to open up on the little old lady who, for whatever reason. And so what I'm saying is this, is that there is a false flag. A false flag is what Hitler used to subjugate Germany. The fascinating thing is that Jade Helm 15, all of these dates synchronize with famous events under the Nazi regime. And, the point is that now we see such a division in this country that it's going by the book, so to speak, like Johnny Cash's old song, one of the best songs I think I've ever heard. It's going by the book. Obviously, he's referring to the biblical revelation.
Yeah.
So the point being is that, and it may not be either or, it may be all of the above. Because again, when you're dealing with battlefield algorithms, there are guys that do nothing but take supercomputers and plan every contingency, an operation within an operation, surrounded by an operation, enveloped in an operation. So the point is, the superficial denials, I don't believe, are satisfying the events. In other words, the evidence, the positioning of troops, the whole attitude, listen, if a spokesman can't even define Jade Helm and their own documents and has to look off to the right, I'm talking about in Bastrop, Texas, actually, I believe he was looking off camera left, then I think people are going, wait a minute, these guys don't even have their story straight. So, either way, I do not believe that this bodes well for freedom in this country, because one of the things I've tried to explain to even gang members that are listening to us, whether they're Latino, black, it doesn't matter, whites, is that you're all being set up. And the very same people that will arm you one day will kill you the next. Obviously, the red, blue, and green list, people didn't believe that. The man who gave that to me almost 20 years ago was murdered for giving that revelation. The red list are primarily gun owners. Now, let's take the veterans. You're a veteran. Never in the history of the United States, where veterans were once honored, where we honored our commitment to them, have we seen the denigration, the destruction, the denial. I can tell you this, I get enough emails of husbands and wives, either spouse is a veteran, and they're watching their spouse writhing in pain because the Veterans Administration has changed the policy on painkillers.
Oh, yeah. I got an email yesterday from someone who had gone to a VA hospital, had a lump on the back of his neck, and they don't know what it is. They need a biopsy. They told him to come back in about 6 weeks. They can't get him in. Now, that's crazy. He should be able to, with his VA benefits, go to a real hospital, a good hospital, and have the government pick that up for him.
Well, absolutely. And then now what are we being told? We're being told that veterans don't have any right to weapons. Here's why the veterans are being disarmed, okay? When you and I did a show 4 years ago, we brought this up. I got a lot of emails saying, don't say that. You're going to make it tough on us. I said, if I don't say that, you're going to die. And I can only tell you this, that the horror stories, I mean, people that used to email me are now dead. And I got an email from the other guy, one last week, and he just saying, I'm on my last legs, Steve. I won't make it through the week. I haven't heard from him since, but thank you for what you tried to do. God. Well, obviously, I wasn't successful enough. But the point that I'm trying to make tonight is that when you have those who have fought for freedom vilified, when they're being denied on purpose, see, I believe it's death by denying them their benefits. The thing that scares anyone who would take over this country is a trained fighting force or someone with military experience that basically knows how to do the same thing they're doing, maybe even better, because you've got a lot of young people. You take a Vietnam vet, and God bless every Vietnam vet listening to me tonight. You take any vet who's been Iraq, it doesn't matter, wherever they've been, Afghanistan, and they're trained fighting force. They are a formidable fighting force, and some of these guys only need a knife and a night vision scope, and they'll get anything they want. So that's why the veterans are being denied medical assistance, George. They want them to die. And I don't mind saying it. I don't apologize for it. I've been warning against it, and it breaks my heart. So the veterans have to go. Let's take Christians, okay? Obviously, Christians are being slaughtered around the world with very few, if anybody, speaking up. Even the gentleman in the White House refuses to speak out or speak against the absolute genocide of Christians going on. He was with the president of Turkey. Turkey still denies the great Armenian genocide.
Yeah, from the 20s. Unbelievable, where I had a number of family members slaughtered during that episode.
Well, I was fortunate before he passed away to meet Demas Shakarian. And Demas Shakarian was a guy that started the Full Gospel Businessman. God bless him. My heart's desire was to meet him. By the grace of God, I met him. But I want you to understand, and you do understand, and when I say that, that's rhetorical, that 1.5 million people were slaughtered at the hands of the Turks, okay?
Yep.
That's not, but here's the problem.
The Ottomans.
Now we have a situation where Christians, men, women, and children are being slaughtered, they're being butchered, they're being beheaded, they're being burned alive. And it's almost like to get a public acknowledgement is an impossibility. And so what I'm saying is now, isn't it fascinating that the Christians are being vilified? And, the Bible talks about the great persecution that's coming during the Great Tribulation. And what we're seeing is an absolute time where innocence no longer exists. And if you're an innocent man, woman, or child, you're subject to butchery. I got to tell you a neat story real quick. Bunch of Marines, I met them, their head, Jeremiah, they're over right now in Iraq, and they were responsible for helping the Peshmerga, who are fighting ISIS, to save 40,000 men, women, and children. Remember when they were given it's going to be slaughtered?
Yep. Yep.
Well, these guys are over teaching the military how to care for their wounds. Jeremiah, he keeps in touch with me by email or by satellite phone, on my radio program, or actually not mine, but a guest appearance I did on Hagman and Hagman. We were able to raise from the Christians money to stop a lot of that slaughter. And I will say this, in real time, the Christians banded together, were praying, and God delivered them supernaturally. Even the Kurds were marveling at what was going on because there was a supernatural element to it. So why I'm saying that is simply this. When people care, when people get involved, one person getting involved, I can tell you this, a couple of Marines and some very amazing nurses and a few people went and made a difference, and by them making a difference, I think it's a cool thing when 40,000 women and children do not get slaughtered. Having that all said, what's troubling me, I believe Jade Helm is a four-prong attack, like we just talked about. When you ask me the possibilities or the probabilities, I think they're all in effect, and I think there are multiple elements at work. If you look at the destruction of the U.S. military, all the generals, admirals fired, you and I have been on that. I got an email from a lieutenant general who had just been terminated because of his speaking out against what's coming on Jade Helm, okay? Because of it might be traced back to him, I won't print it. But I'm putting on my website a Navy SEAL, a real one, not a wannabe or wish he would have been, but a real one. And now we've got basically so many testimonials from people coming through and coming out of the military, and they're talking, I'm sorry, but they're talking CW, they're talking Civil War, and they're also talking about the fact that many of the generals, George, have had to leave the country because they were told if they didn't, they would be murdered, and their families too. So who would threaten a fighting man in his family who have fought for this country with murder unless there's someone who hates the very, things America stands for? I have a statement. I'm sorry I make it. It's sad I have to make it, but America has been raped, pillaged, and plundered, and the country we once had, outside of a miracle, has gone under. Freedom's under attack. If you're a constitutionalist, that means that everybody that signed the Constitution was a terrorist, and I've actually seen, maybe you have two on YouTube, the actual military teaching that the United States was set up by terrorists. Well, somebody once said one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. But the word freedom and subjugation come to mind, especially in light of the greatest spy network ever devised against its own people. And that's what's tragic because, we have seen the enemy and we used to look outside of the borders. And I ask every military guy I meet, even the ones that hate my guts, what changed that made me your enemy? What changed? And you know what? Many of them just, snicker, jeer, or say, your day's coming. But the point is, and I say, so is yours, and it's called hell and eternity. But the point being is that this country is polarized, and it's a tragedy. So I thank you for letting me come on and say to the people that are being used to initiate war against each other, step back, see who's pulling strings, whoever's funding it. Those are the real enemies. I think it's senseless. I think it's silly, and I think it's disgusting that agent provocateurs have been so successful in destroying modern law enforcement. Look, there are crooked cops, there are dirty cops, there are some really evil people. But when all law, and prophetically, we're in the period of lawlessness. In other words, when the laws of the land are no longer respected, then each man does that which is right in his own sight, and that's when you've got revolution.
Jade Helm, July 15th through September 15th, in those states that we mentioned earlier, God knows what will happen, Stephen.
Well, take in Walmart's closing. Walmart's closing for hokey, quote, plumbing problems. And then you get into the tunneling systems. You get into the under martial law, Walmart's become strategic supply depots and also internment camps. And most people don't know that there are really underground tunnels in some of the bigger Walmarts. So out of the blue, you heard the story. What was it? Instantly, 500 plus Walmart employees were given a couple hours notice of the store's closing. So when you start putting it all together, it appears, and unless things change, that there are multiple plans in place to generate a false flag, to make war on the American people, and to use a group of terrorists that were going to be initiated to make war on Texas and some of the southern states. And ultimately, terrorism always has somebody who pays its bills. A terrorist is nothing more than someone's foreign policy extension in the background. Right now, we are a divided nation. Jesus said a house divided against itself can't stand.
Can't stand
and
at
that's
all.
where we're at. Look, there's some really great people still left in the military and still left in DHS and still left in the FBI, but they're worried for their families, too. They know what they took an oath, and this is what's tough because most military took an oath in the old days, took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now we have the complete, in my opinion, takeover of the United States. This has always been a plan. That is a revolution. You cannot look at any nation that, quote, went communistic that didn't have a revolution. And when I see the mouthpieces of revolution stirring and continuing to stir, and a slanted, what I would call vomitous approach to news reporting in the mainstream, you know the agenda's in play, and unfortunately it's going to be very, very deadly.
Well, welcome back to Coast. Stephen Quayle with us, of course. He has been with us since the beginning of time, practically. And I can't believe it, Stephen, but it's happening. I talked with Craig Hewlett a little bit about this last night, about Jade Helm. We think that it's a training exercise in case of civil disobedience or something. What do you think?
Well, I think it's more than that, George. I think, obviously, by its very name, mastering the human domain, we're seeing, and it leads into the next subject, but we're seeing that they want to know everything about who we are, names, addresses, biometrics, social media accounts, what we do, our travel history, our communications, financial transaction movement of our physical assets, who you know, and the context, the contextual data of our demographics, our politics, cultural norms, and religion. So what we're doing, I'm afraid, with Jade Helm is so multifaceted. One thing and they're very, the sword in the middle and the arrows pointing both ways. They want to know everything. And I think that people need to understand that in the United States, all of their effort with Jade Helm should be directed outside towards America's real threats, the tragedy of felonious aliens being released. I'm talking about now ones that have been imprisoned in the United States, the murders we've watched take the country by storm, the seemingly silence from the administration, the Justice Department, and others. Then we're dealing with the whole idea of the human domain. I'll make it real simple. They want to know everything about everyone. I challenge all the cyber attacks. I don't believe it's some ominous group of Russian hackers. The Russian hackers are too smart, and all hackers, they want money. They don't want this data information out. Information can be sold on the black market, credit cards, etc. But what's troubling to me about Jade Helm, and as you know, I'm a pretty outspoken opponent of it, never in the history of the United States have special operations under basically every different branch of the service been brought together for nighttime exercises. And do you remember, George, when they basically were saying, even to the police departments and 9/11 and sheriff's departments, if you hear any gunfire, don't respond.
Mm-hmm.
Well, people are terrified around the country, and rightly so, and God bless Texas. In my opinion, they have one of the most astute governors who basically says, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I'll verify it. Remember when Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify? And it's troubling to me that, let me give you a quote from someone, and then we'll obviously know who it is. He said, how fortunate for governments that the people they administer don't think. Well, that's Adolf Hitler. So one of the things with Jade Helm is the multitudinous, different ways they're coming at us with so much data. And so I believe that it's designed to also be a cover for the positioning of troops throughout the country. It's not just the original 7 states and it's expanded into 15 states, but there's something else going on. And everybody's been postulating from earthquakes, obviously the Russian intrusions into our airspace. Russia all of a sudden went from being a partner to now being the number one defined enemy, which I categorically reject. The number one enemy of the American people seems to be those who are making war on it. And my question is, since when did 238,000 dead veterans become the enemy? Since when did the middle class, who's pretty much wiped out, become the enemy? Since when did our heritage demand the erasure of the entire, if you will, Civil War? And there's two, sides to the Civil War. Now, also, I maintain that it's borders, language, culture. That's Michael Savage's quote. I believe our borders are destroyed. I believe our language is definitely languishing. And also, our culture is being taken apart piece by piece. A famous statement made by someone in authority basically said, America's the greatest country in the world, and we intend to change all that. I was reading Drudge's headlines, and do you see Drudge's headlines tonight on the top left corner?
I sure did, yeah.
You know, what has happened to this country? We're seeing the most extreme indications that everyone other than them, meaning them are the proponents of a new world order, of the globalist government. We're hearing all these reports, and they're real reports, about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and all of the different events going on. Then we've got the three-ring circus of how many people have thrown their hat in the ring for the Republican nomination, and only one, in my opinion, is telling it like it is. You know, and I think we can go with a statement, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Well, the only guy I see telling the truth is Donald Trump. And look, this isn't a political speech, it's just this. Look at how all of the rats want to get on his case for saying what, and I'm not just talking about John McCain, I'm talking about the immigrant issue, and something's got to be done. Now, the intentional positioning, and I think you're reading the same stories I am, that the integration of everyone from Africans to Muslims from all over the country being selectively introduced to over 24, 25 key cities. Well, that's a direct, I believe, assault upon the middle class and upon the American citizens. So Jade Helm is a multifaceted exercise in which they're checking everyone's response. Obviously, my words will be scrutinized. Your words will be scrutinized. They're trying to get the general psychological response of the people that are defining their concerns. Now, I think it's tragic that we're seeing United Nations vehicles. The sovereignty of the United Nations is going to disappear. Some people don't like that statement. I hate it. I love this country. I love what it stood for. I love what it was. But just as the Confederate flag has been made now an object of ridicule, divorced from history, look, I'm not saying what it stood for is all that good, but what I'm saying is, again, our national identity, our national landmarks, everything is being changed, turned into a World Heritage Site. or whatever they want to call it under Agenda 21. So Jade Helm, to me, is the military arm of the complete takeover through the identification and eradication of the American citizens. We all know Larry Graithwall, the FBI agent who penetrated the Weather Underground.
Mm-hmm.
And, he made the statement back in the time he did that there was plans to murder 30 or 40 million Americans. Most people simply can't get their mind around that we would actually be now, instead of the land of the home, or the land and home of the free and the brave, that now we have been turned into a bunch of criminals and knaves in the eyes of those globalists who basically, if you love the freedoms that were given to us under the Bill of Rights, the constitutional guarantees, we become a lawless nation now, and a nation that becomes lawless is capable of incredible, dangerous slaughter of its inhabitants.
Steve, some time ago, there was a story of a time traveler. His name was John Teeter, and he left behind a number of things that he thought would happen because he was a time traveler. And one of the things he said that would happen would be a civil war in the United States. Another one. What do you think of that?
Well, I agree, and I remember when we started, you and I, on doing shows together, the one thing I made the statement of, the coming civil war is going to be very real. The statement I think you made is, let's hope not, or something. But the fact is that it's being stirred up. The strife is being stirred up. With the militarization of the police became the vilification of the public. And now you've got the public rioting over what I believe is genuine police abuse. Look, you don't need to gun down somebody when three, muscle-bound cops can grab them. There's no danger to somebody. And even with, a firearm, now people can say, I'm not a cop. Well, again, I'm not a cop, but I'm also not blind. We don't need to turn the police. But listen, that's part of the Russian Revolution. That's part of the whole idea. That's what Hitler did with the brown shirts. And I think what's tragic is watching what's happening to the U.S. military. They used to have their focus external to the enemy's United States. Gunning down of the four Marines is a good example of how much contempt our own government. They used to be told that the Clintons, forgive me, but they didn't like the military or the Secret Service. Now we have at least the flag flying at half-mast over the halls of Congress, yet the White House didn't even acknowledge the Marines that were slaughtered. It's crazy, isn't it? You can give a guy a weapon to go to war to defend the country, but you sure can't let him have a weapon to defend his own life. I think that the Marines, and I know a lot of them, I'm sure you know many Marines too, this is not something that's going to set well with the Marine Corps, and I believe that the other branches of the service who take their constitutional oath seriously are going to be as upset, are going to be. They are as upset. So it's interesting. You have the oath breakers on the left side, and you've got the oath keepers on the right side. And look, we are going to have a civil war. It's already planned. And again, one of the tenets of the overthrow of the United States was to pit every ethnic group against every ethnic group.
Well, I was going to say, Stephen, will this be between the haves and the have-nots, or will it be between the people and the government?
All of the above. I think you saw a good example of it in Waco with the setup of the bikers. And the thing is that, to my knowledge, if you look at the information that there's been a containment of the information. I believe the preliminary autopsies show that most of the shots fired were from law enforcement, and it was like basically shooting fish in a barrel with snipers. Now, I maintain that was a whole setup. Now, let me explain to people what I believe was going on. The idea of bike gangs could ultimately band together, and there's a lot of, and look, these aren't all criminals. I mean, good night. Sturgis has the Harley-Davidson rally in South Dakota has sometimes close to 1 million people.
They sure do. Oh, yeah.
And they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're judges, they're the men and women who, many of them have made this country great. So when the bikers were lured, L-U-R-E-D, into this thing, it was designed to basically, number one, they kept him in jail. I understand now. It's probably the greatest travesty and miscarriage of justice. You can't hold him incommunicado. There were no charges levied against, what were there, 186, George, something like that? It was, yeah. And so, the whole country should have been screaming. But see, I maintain now we're a nation of lawlessness. And it's interesting because you always ask me about this, but the Bible prophecy says one of the signs of the Antichrist will be total lawlessness, where each man does that which is right in his own sight.
It's funny, Stephen, I got an email tonight when we talk about biblical terms and we talk about the final trumpet. He said, what's the Donald's last name? Trump? He said he was the final trumpet.
I think that's what I call a prophetic neon light flashing. Listen, Donald Trump is successful. He's outspoken. He lives in a no BS world. I think the attacks on him, I'll tell you, some of the Republicans, especially Senator from Arizona, better back off, because now the whole POW issue is coming to the forefront again. And if you remember, there was a giant cover-up. I'll tell you a quick story, may I, about the POWs?
Sure.
The reason Ross Perot quit the presidential campaign is he was totally threatened. I think you remember him making a statement about death threats against his family. Well, a certain gentleman, and I think he's known the name, but I won't drop the name right now, basically had a order to get the documents that Ross Perot had in his possession concerning all the live POWs and MIA.
And we left a lot of them behind.
We left a lot of them behind. McCain's attitude was not only pathetic but disgusting. So, here's the thing. People can deal with the fruit of evil until they're blue in the face, but they've got to get to the root of evil. And here's the root of evil in the whole country. There is no truth in the land. Everything is spin. And let's just look at the mainstream vomit brokers. I call the mainstream press the vomit brokers. I'm sorry, but, listening to them is like being thrown in a bathtub with about five guys hurling the same meal, and it would have been enough to, and disgusting enough to have it. And somebody says, well, that's pretty graphic. Well, that's the sanitized version of what I really think, because, again, the thing that we're seeing throughout the country is we're seeing just obvious denial in the face of truth. Tell a lie, tell a big enough lie, tell it enough times, and that's what the mainstream media thrives on. Two words. I'll give you a good example. Benghazi, G. Fast and Furious, G. We can go on. And I think the thing we've got to address, too, is Fukushima. George, can you believe that the word cause and effect, or the two words cause and effect, seem no longer applicable to common sense, or I would just say this, critical thinking? We're hearing words that, the astonishing reports of the sea life, the whales, everything basically dying. The fishermen, their catches are lessening and lessening. And when somebody took me to task, and I said, well, the Pacific Ocean is a third of the sea, and the Bible talks about a third of the life in the sea dying, they said, well, it's only 30.3%. I said, yeah, but you're not counting the part of the Pacific that's frozen with icebergs. And they
Sure.
said, well, yeah.
And they deny that there's any possibility of danger from the remnants of Fukushima.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would tell everybody to basically look up, what radioactive isotopes. I think plutonium is 29,000 years plus or minus. Maybe it's 28,500. All of the strontium-90, the birth defects even from the above-ground atomic testing in Nevada, atmospheric testing, that affected a lot of people in the West, especially with thyroid cancer. Now we've got the ocean currents carrying the debris, and I don't know if you're watching some of the radioactive reports or radioactivity reports around, but if you go to any nuclear handbook, any of the civil defense stuff, or even the basic nuclear medicine, the amount of exposure that people are getting is, and literally when I say this, it's off the charts as far as cumulative radiation exposure. Radiation is not a one-time deal. If you keep getting exposed, it builds up and builds up and builds up. And at a certain point, if you get an LD50 rating and lethal dose where it means 50% of the people are going to die. I don't know if you have callers calling in from Alaska, but it's dire. And then there's no denying. People say this. Here's the disconnect. We've never seen it like this before. It's never been like this before. Everybody will make those statements, but they'll say, what could possibly be the root of everything dying in the Pacific Ocean? Well, the most horrific man-made disaster has taken place with the denials. It's like radioactivity is just something that ends up in a comic book turning somebody into a superhero. It's not like that at all. It's destroying. And then the mutagenic nature of radiation, in other words, the ability to produce horrific distortions in the normal sea life, the mammals that are in the ocean, is becoming even more problematic. And it's heartbreaking to see all the great creatures. Look, I used to be a really intense scuba diver, and when the reefs were good and the fishing, the fish and all of the abalone were off Abalone Cove in Southern California, I broke my teeth diving in Catalina.
What'd you bump against?
Yeah, a seal.
Oh.
And I also busted my eardrums because, a couple times.
You got to be careful going down there.
Yep. But anyway, the thing is that it's now I'm talking to people. I have a lot of listeners like you do from all over the world, and they're just telling me, Steve, it's dire. It's tragic. And it wasn't just the U.S. Navy sailors. Japan passed a law where basically the investigative journalists were pretty much muzzled. Do you remember that?
Sure.
And there was a little bit of a upheaval over it, but here's the deal. This is not an extinction-level event, but it is, I believe, a biblically prophetic event, because when a third of the life in the sea dies, what happens to the people that eat the sea life, that basically are dependent upon the ocean, especially the Pacific Ocean and the Pacific Rim? And one of the other things that no one ever deals with is idea of the undersea volcanoes and the sulfur that's being emitted and the acidity and how that's going to react and does react, and how the ocean currents are carrying that. So the alkalinity, pH of the ocean is changing, and I believe it is the biggest cover. When I say biggest, it's kind of hard, George, because every time you think there's nothing bigger they can cover up, you have to come to the conclusion that everything is covered up. And the mainstream press isn't even picking up on the 11 doctors now. 11. That's an important number. You've probably watched that the MDs that are being murdered. Well, there were 11 of those. Again, most people don't realize of Fukushima. Now, I'm not saying the two are related, but I'm saying that somebody behind it loves the number 11 because you've got March 11th, 2011, meltdown at Fukushima due to the 9.0 earthquake, and then now we've got, the murder, and they've only got 6 they say are murdered. Well, what happened to the other 5? Okay,
yeah,
they haven't.
And it's all over the country now. And Mexico, right?
Yes, sir. And you and I did this story, and my compliments, because you were the really first big national broadcaster, international broadcaster, to pick it up and run with it. And so the reason why, and let me explain something to people. The reason why the dead scientists now, I've lost count. There are people that claim it's 200. I think I've got 126 on my website or more. But the reason those were the who's who in the world of biological warfare, they were the who's who in molecular biology, they were who's who in bioweapons, and one of them specifically was a Russian scientist who came up with the quintessential, if you will, vaccine, and this was a safe one, for all viruses. They whacked him too. So now that we've got a new grouping, what's the biggest push right now? Genetically modified organisms. Now, our Congress said no to labeling, to warning people. So it's open season now on eating all of the modified food. Talking about something with genetically modified food now that's going to basically, they used to call it Frankenfood, but I don't think people understand when you've got genetically altered food, what that does to the human genome.
I know they play with Mother Nature. It's going to backfire on us.
Well, and not only is it going to backfire on them, but look, now even the founder of Tesla, Elon Musk, is saying you got to be careful of the robot apocalypse. You guys, and some of the brightest guys that are even those who helped develop the technology are saying be careful of AI. Then you get, obviously, the U.S. military is really big on cyborgs and really becoming more open in their super soldier program. When I used to write about that and talk about that, I think people used to think that I was from a galaxy far, far away, and now they're having to admit it. And again, what's tragic about this is guess who disappears in the equation? Us. Years ago, and I don't remember how long, but at least 8 or 9 years ago, I coined a term, or I at least brought it forth on your show, called technological decadence, okay? And I just shortened it to technecadence, because I like to do that. I figure since all language seems to be bastardized and very few words really mean what they used to mean, I'll just invent my own words, define them, and therefore if I'm the one that first uses a word, then there's nobody who can say, well, it really doesn't mean that. And so over the years, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing ultimately the replacement of human beings by machines and by sentient machines. Ray Kurzweil's book, Spiritual Machines. And it's like the old movie Christine, I think it was. Isn't that the movie? What's the name of the movie that becomes demon-possessed? When you're talking about technology of the ancients, the people who control the past determine the future. That's my statement. And by keeping the true technology hidden, and I mean, when the Indian government goes to an aerospace world gathering and present their papers on Vimanas, the ancient flying machines of India, and the weapons they possessed, and the power sources, even instruction manuals in Sanskrit for how to fly these things. Well, people can laugh, but Hitler's scientists took it seriously, and Third Reich, which, by the way, I'm writing about that right now, the technology of the Third Reich, beyond what most people have.
And they
done.
had amazing technology.
Right,
Steve.
but guess what? The Anunnaki were all over the globe, and what's fascinating is when we get to the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayans in the next hour with Timothy, we're talking about such advanced technology that built the great edifices in Peru specifically and on the shores of Lake Titicaca that it defies the how should I say this, the primitive weapons. If most people even understand, the weaponry can tell you a lot about the culture and about the civilization's past. That's why the conquistadors just made quick work of the Aztecs. But the Aztecs, Mayans, and Incans, none of them declared that they built those great edifices from Machu Picchu to Tiwanaku, and we'll talk about some of those places because they're going to be very, very important in what we're going to discuss in the next hour. Again, technology is suppressed, the truth is suppressed, the Smithsonian, we all hear about the great Smithsonian cover-up, and by the way, that one article that was circulating that the Smithsonian admits, that was a satire or a satirical article, but what's important for people to understand is that there are massive, the records of even the 1880s, early 1900s in the United States, and I'll tell you a funny story. It was after you and I talked the first time on Coast to Coast, this literally happened, about giants. I mentioned the Lovelock giants in Lovelock, Nevada, the red-haired giants.
Yeah.
The museum that had the two giant mummies, they had a little visit from the Men in Black, and they took those out of that museum. But it was based on what we talked. So it's fascinating. I tell people, isn't it interesting? We go to giants on Coast to Coast, and my servers light up. You would think that you and I are the late-night drive-in for every spook organization in the world, and they pull their computers up, probably grab their coffee, and probably say a few expletives and then listen carefully. Now, how can I make that statement? It's simple. I can get my logs. You can get the logs of who listens, but that's literally true. So, again, keep in mind, and I want the Coast listeners to understand this, the real history of the world is far different than that which they admit to. Again, and unfortunately, modern anthropology has based a lot of their presumptions on a lot of lies. It's fascinating, too, George, that ever since we talked about little creatures, my inbox is filling up. It filled up tonight even with people saying, are you going to talk about Bigfoot? Are you going to talk about, the little creatures? And people from Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, where the Bee Gees came from.
Well, it's funny, Stephen, you bring that up. Yesterday I had David Paulides on, who is talking about people who disappear in our park systems. And one of the theories, people being taken by little people.
By the way, Little Creatures has been an amazing success. People have said to me, thank you for writing this because I know what I saw and you're the only one telling me I'm not crazy. Well, I'm telling a lot of the Coast listeners what they see in orbs, you're not crazy. What you see in the wee people, you're not crazy. What you see in Bigfoot, you're not crazy. And it goes on and on and on. But again, when you want to control the truth, you have to ridicule, you have to vilify, you have to nullify, and that's what they do. And that's why the giants have been covered up. And what we're going to talk about, I'm getting excited now, we're going to talk about why it's so important to cover up the giants until the time that they're going to come forth. You probably read the article about the Celts and the grave that was found with mixed species. In other words, the things that I would call chimeras or that were historically in mythology and legends, even a unicorn. By the way, the unicorn is mentioned in the Bible. So people can try and say, well, it was a big horse. No, it wasn't. A unicorn, when you trace the word, means exactly what everyone has come to believe. So it seems like, again, there is more and more being revealed. Jesus said there's nothing that's been hidden that isn't going to be made known. And so that's the premise I'm working on right now. And so when we get into Admiral Byrd and some of the things of the hollow earth theory, and that's, again, what I'm writing about right now. And I don't know if you knew this, but I'll throw a piece of information out there that'll blow people's minds. Did you know that the Nazis succeeded in building aircraft carrier-length U-boats?
That's huge.
That's huge. They built 21 of them. So all the stories about the U-boats that disappeared and all of Germany's best scientists and technologists and everybody that they had disappearing wasn't all just make-believe stuff. As a matter of fact, you and I did a show years ago on that, on Operation High Jump. And immediately I was contacted, I believe, by the great-grandson or one of the relatives of Admiral Derrance, the head of the Nazi U-boats, actually the underwater navy. And I can't pronounce the German. So when we do a show like this, and again, thank you so much for allowing me to take this freedom, it's phenomenal how many people that are holding the data, they're splitting, they want to tell somebody, will come forth with stuff. And now look, not all of the people are real. But when the majority are, and I'll get an email from a scientist saying, you can look me up on the net, you're telling it like it is, I tend to pay attention. And sure, I get skunked now and then, but there's only so much time and only so many dollars that you can do this. And by the way, I believe that the expedition that we're going to share with you, and it's Genesis 6, we're unlocking the history of the world. That may sound like a braggadocious statement, but it's not, because I've been writing about this stuff for so long, and you've had me on your show for so long, and there's others now taking up the cause and going different places with this, but there's more and more evidence turning up every day.
Stephen, I want to talk with you in the moments we have before next hour about biblical prophecy. Are we in it right now?
Absolutely. I believe we are absolutely in the start of the Great Tribulation. You and I have talked about that. Makes a lot of people uncomfortable. They don't want to admit it. But look, here's a good example. We're seeing now Christianity vilified all over the world. We're seeing Christians slaughtered. We're seeing them absolutely in the most horrific imaginable torture, drowning little children, burning them alive, tearing out little girls' hearts. I've said that on your show before. every form of evil, from the beheading to just gross stuff, is taking place. And not one word from, the slaughterhouse over that. And it really makes me upset because, again, it's just like those Marines. Those are America's finest. When someone takes this is important, when someone lays down, is willing to die for their country, and all of our veterans who have, and then to be held in contempt, and I believe it is held in contempt, and when you see the mass firings, or some of them just plain quit, but when you're talking 300, I think that's how many so far, 300 battle-hardened, experienced, everything from generals, admirals, down the line, leaving the services, and then new guys coming on. And again, we can just look back to the history. You don't build prison camps to basically keep them empty forever. So I believe we are at the beginning, and just like you say, the trumpet judgments, well, we've got the 7 seals that have to be opened first. We've got the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, And what's interesting, that one doesn't stop while the other ones take off. It's not Pony Express. It's kind of like the old Western movie. One horseman rides and another comes out of the left side of the screen, another comes out of the right, and pretty soon they are all riding together. And death, famine, war, look what's on the horizon. By the way, I want to make a statement. It's unusual that we now are seeing the vilification of Russia. And what did Vladimir Putin do, which I salute, by the way? And I'm not an apologist, but I'm saying, look, he said, we will not have genetically modified food in the Russian Federation. When we talk about the times of the end, the biblical prophecies, the great earthquakes are now happening. The great earthquakes are now happening. The plan is, when you hear of EMP, electromagnetic pulse, how many people does it say are going to die?
90%.
In the first year.
90%.
So the Bible says in Bible prophecy, a third is going to die and then another third. So we've got 6 billion people. So, a third of 6 is 2. A third of 4 is 1.3 approximately. So we've got 50% of the Earth's population is going to go. That's according to the Bible. According to the Georgia Guidestones, they want about 5.5 billion people gone. So how are they going to do that? By genetically engineering viruses. A virus is much more effective than a nuclear weapon. A nuclear weapon's good for taking out real estate and installations. A bioweapon is perfect. Now, what did we hear today? The U.S. just bought $133 million worth of smallpox vaccine. You saw that story. Remember, smallpox is supposed to be eradicated? Oh, excuse me. Didn't the Center for Disease Control find like a cache or a stash of a bunch of smallpox?
Mm-hmm.
So we're there, George. We are at it. And again, you talk, and we're talking about sorceries, okay? Most people don't know that biblical term is pharmaceuticals, okay? Isn't it amazing that no one in the mainstream press is taking on the ties between all of the mass murders and pharmaceuticals?